as I was coming up here, my wife said to me, try not to aggravate people too much. And being a husband, I said, I'll say what I want to say. And if there's anybody that believes that I actually said that, you're single. No, anyway, it's one of those things. Actually, what I said sounded much more like, yes, dear. My wife saw a sign several years ago that said, the smartest thing a man ever said was, yes, dear. And she reminds me of it quite regularly. I am president of the Gospel Ministerial Alliance. You know, God has His own way of doing things. It just amazes me continually how He does it. I was raised a preterist. Okay? My parents were preterists, my grandparents were preterists. We didn't know we called it that back then, but we were. And consequently, I have no consciousness of other theologies. They just don't seem to make any sense to me at all. You know, so I generally try not to get in, any arguments, because it's kind of hard for me to argue about something I don't know anything about and can't make any sense out of. It's just difficult. Which is odd, because the Lord worked it, so I ended up president of the Gospel Ministerial Alliance, which has about 90% people who are dispensationalists. And yes, I practice a lot of keeping my mouth shut. Okay? It's the only way it's going to work. But the Gospel Ministerial Alliance came out, believe it or not, of Preterism, because in about 1943-44, when the church there in Brady became what you and I would call Preterist, one of the first things they did was they went out and shared with all their brethren the wonderful thing they discovered about Jesus coming and being in the kingdom of God and how great that is, at which time they were promptly kicked out of all their fellowships. Almost immediately. Okay? So Brother Grimes and several other pastors who had seen the light here, they got together and said, we're going to start an organization and we're not going to make those mistakes. It's for anybody who's looking for the truth of Jesus Christ. Wherever you're at in that walk, you can be a member. Okay? Absolutely essential that you believe in Jesus Christ, have a deep love in your heart for Him, but other than that, we're going to leave it as open as we possibly can. Now you might think, well, what's the purpose of an organization like that? Well, so many times when I'm out speaking at GMA events, they'll come up and go, I'm so glad I found y'all, because I thought I was going to have to join a denomination and we were going to have to, bring all our preaching in line with the denomination. We're going to have to bring all our materials in line with the denomination and sign off all our property to them. And they'll go, but we found y'all, we can be a member, we don't have to do any of that. To see the look on their faces and the joy in their heart, that's payment enough right there, right? Go on to the next slide, please. We have a website, www.gmai.us. GMA was taken, but we're GMA Incorporated, so we're gmai.us. You get what you can get, right? Now, the webpage has a link for applications for ministers and churches, and we have our Constitution and bylaws. Nowadays they're big on transparency. We've been doing that for a long time. You can read the whole Constitution and bylaws, download it, read it, every word of it. Right there. It's available. You don't like it? Actually, if you don't like it, let us know, because we're always interested for people's input on that kind of stuff. The yearly dues are $35 for a minister and $50 for a church. That's it. Period. That alone has brought a smile to many people's faces, because some of them have to pay tithes and $100 a month and everything else to belong to some organization. And when you really look at what they get out of it, it's almost nothing. If you were a pastor of a church or the president of an organization, religious organization, of course, you have to be, the pastor or president has to be a member for the actual church or religious organization to join. Okay, because it's a minister's alliance. Okay. It's kind of interesting how that worked out. Back at the time when they were first getting this organization together, the IRS had quit doing these kind of things the way they were doing it before. And they hadn't really organized a new way of doing it, but they did all the paperwork and submitted it. Well, they did the only thing they could think to do at the time, which they gave us the same clearance that they give large denominations. And not only that, because it was done way back in the 50s, we grandfathered clauses out of a lot of the requirements that they have for the newer formed organizations. So once again, we're really blessed, and the Lord works things out the way He wants to work things out. We barely ever see it coming. But it works. The minister must be ordained to join. I have had so many people ask me what ordained means, and I'll tell you, as far as we're concerned, it's whatever you think it is. Okay? Yeah, we're just not going to get into that. Now, the organization, whatever it is, a church or a religious organization, has to remain nonprofit. Okay. One thing I tell people, if you're a member of an organization already, like a denomination or something along those lines, and you're happy with it, stay with it. It's not a problem. We're there if it ever gets to the point where it's too uncomfortable to bear. We're here. You know. Now, like I said, we're a loose organization. We don't have a whole lot of requirements on you. If you need us, call us. Other than that, we're probably going to stay out of your business as much as we possibly can. Yes, you can be kicked out of the GMA. It has never happened yet. We currently have about 100 ministers in about 50 churches. It varies. It goes up. It goes down. It changes. But when you're basically there to serve people and churches and believers, you take whatever you get. We're not a recruiting organization. We don't go out and have membership drives or anything like that. But we're available if people need us. Go on to the next slide, please. Now, I couldn't show you the website because we're not Wi-Fi, but this is a little portion of our web page. You notice it's nice and simple. There's a minister application, there's a church application, a constitution and bylaws. Those are documents you can download and look at them at your leisure. Now, we also have another page that is the members who want to be listed as a member, because we ask. We put a list on another page of them. I guess they consider it advertising because we put a link to their website or their email or whatever they want on there. Go to the next slide, please. Now that we've covered the GMA, I want to go to the fun part. This is PreteristUS.com. This is something that I came up with as a preterist. I call it my battle portal. Okay. No, it's not that mean, but I put a lot of things on here, and I just encourage you at your leisure, look the website up, check the page, and see what you think. Down at the bottom of it, which I couldn't get it all on here, there's an email where you can tell us what you think. If there's anything you agree with or disagree with, that's fine, let us know. We're always updating. If we're not always learning, that's the definition of stagnant, right? We don't want to go there. We learn constantly, adding information. But this is just some things to kind of challenge people's thinking. You know, you get to think about it. There's a term the psychologists use called cognitive dissonance. I don't even think I'm saying that right. But what it means is if I believe something and my actions are too far apart from what I believe, it causes stress. Imagine for a minute you're in a church and every Sunday somebody tells you Jesus is coming back any day now. Of course, you go out and get a 30-year loan on your house, a 6-year loan on your car, send your kids to college so they can go have a better career, right? People are out getting married so they can raise families. It almost sounds like they don't really believe it. That's cognitive dissonance, it's that stress in there, pulling both ways. Okay, now, one of the hardest things I've found to do for me with my background is to talk to someone who's not a preterist. So I kind of have worked on a real simple formula. Okay. I know Brother Mayano and lots of other people have talked about this, but I gotta, remember that rock band Kiss? Keep it simple, silly. So I like to keep it simple. I'm good with simple. I can do simple. Okay. Go to the next slide, please. How to talk to a futurist. Section 1. Okay, go into the next slide, please. I've been making a real effort over the years to come up with some way to talk to futurists. And one of the first things you try not to do is aggravate them. Now, I have a little story about that. When I very first was assistant pastor at our church, one Wednesday night Bible study, the pastor was not feeling well, so he stayed home, so I was in charge of the Bible study. And the only 3 people that showed up at first were 3 sweet little old ladies in the church. I mean, these were just fantastic ladies, right? Well, then one of their sisters and her husband showed up. Well, they had just moved back from, I don't know where they were actually, and they were very, very much not into our doctrine. I mean, very, very much. Well, they came in and they sat down, and almost immediately they made a frontal attack on me, which, if you think about it, wasn't really a wise move, because the 3 ladies sitting over there were my Sunday school teachers. Okay? Well, those 3 sweet little old ladies brought out their Bibles, opened them up, and ran over them like a steamroller runs over a smacked cat on the highway. I mean, there was fur flying everywhere. I didn't even have to do anything except sit there. That was basically all I did, was sit and watch. I wish I had a video, because I can't describe to you how sweet and how loving and how ruthless they were. They tore them totally up. The point of the story is, do you think either one of those people is a preterist nowadays?
Yes.
No.
Oh.
Not even close. In fact, I think they'd strongly dislike us. I guess the point is, winning an argument isn't always accomplishing your purpose. Okay? The purpose is to be gentle. I found that the best way is a light touch. Okay? You could write a book if you want to, but the odds you're going to get one of them to read it is pretty low, right? The web pages basically go unviewed. And I really think that face-to-face personal contact with somebody, now, it's really important, I think, that they kind of start the conversation. It seems to work best for me that way. It usually starts off with something like, "Oh, I see you're a pastor." "Yes." "Oh, well, I just can't wait for Jesus to come back." Okay. At which point I say, "Well, if that's the way you see it," then you usually get a response like, "What do you mean by that?" For some reason, dispensationalists think their view is everybody's view, but we as preterists know better. Yeah, and next slide, please. There's several reasons why when you're talking to people, they might just totally reject what you're saying. Just totally throw it under the bus. It's just such a new idea to them that they have no basis for thinking about it. It's just, what? and in those cases, you make your point, you move on. You plant the seed, let it go. Okay? This person you're talking to might not even be a Christian. You might be less pointing out the values of being a preterist than just pointing out the values of being a Christian. How wonderful Jesus is, They might be totally locked into a denomination. I've started using a term here lately, denominationalist. You can tell when you've run into somebody who's had some really serious indoctrination into a denomination. It will come out almost immediately. And if it does, it's probably best to just move on. First of all, you don't want to upset them too bad. They're Christians. You don't want to spoil their relationship with their church. But then again, to not plant the seed at all is kind of lax on our part. So it's usually best to, like I said, have a light touch. Just plant the seed and move on. Next slide, please. You want to start off, usually I find it best, with something to get them to relax a little bit. We're talking to Christians now. And an example would be, I just want you to know I love and believe in Jesus Christ. You could kind of see where a Christian would feel a little bit more at ease talking to you after that. Not quite so on edge, because he got a little idea where you're coming from. Okay. Next slide. I like to say something that most people would agree with, even if not in their current theology. And you can paraphrase these, or you can make your own statements, whatever you're comfortable with. But the idea here is to say something to at least get them thinking. Okay? I usually say something like, I believe Jesus Christ did everything he said he would when he said he would do it. Very seldom do I get somebody to jump up in my face on that one. They're usually okay with that. They're, oh, yeah, all right, yeah. They don't really realize the theological implications of that statement because most dispensationalists and many futurists would disagree with that statement, which is really, if you think about it, kind of odd. We all believe and worship Jesus Christ. Why would we not believe he was right? As the brother said last night, don't tell me he didn't know what he was talking about. That doesn't work. Okay. Next slide, please. We're trying to make them think. I also like to make a statement that kind of sums the whole thing up. Now, what I've come up with for me, what makes me comfortable, is I believe that Jesus Christ returned with a spiritual return, spiritual kingdom, and spiritual resurrection. Now, that's a lot in one sentence. Most people, you're going to have to give them a little time on that one. So I kind of say it and then move on. I don't dwell too much on it, but there's an important principle that kicks in now. And this is something I learned raising my boys, 3 boys. When it's time to talk about the birds and the bees, only answer the questions that they ask. Okay? Don't get the first question and give them the whole story. That's too much. Okay? Just answer the questions that they ask. When you're with someone and you've shared what your thoughts are, and they ask a question, just answer the question. Don't unload your whole theological background, because us preterists tend to be really theological. Don't unload all of it on them. Just give them enough light touch. If they've got a really good question, and you get lots of really good questions, and an honest, direct, don't pretend you know everything, but an honest, direct answer is usually really appreciated. Now, at any point here, you may sense that you're losing the person you're talking to, at which point I advise just shut it down. Move on, talk about something else, whatever's necessary to let it go. You've planted your seed. They've got a basic idea who you are and what you're saying. You don't have to grind it in. Just kind of let it settle in. Now, it's like when Jesus was talking in the parable. You plant the seed, sometimes it grows and sometimes it doesn't. But that depends on the ground it's in. So, just a light touch. Next slide, please. Questions. If they ask you questions, answer them as honestly as you can. It's usually best not to ask them questions. And the reason I say that, there's an interesting principle in psychology. If someone asks you a question, you feel obligated to answer, even if you don't know the answer. Well, if you've been raised in a church that is decidedly what I would consider wrong in the theology, they're going to answer the question wrong. But it's also a function of psychology that you're going to defend that answer to your death. Because that's the way people are. They hate being wrong, right? So I don't ask them questions because I know that I can solidify a bad position that way. So I just kind of avoid that. I let them ask the questions. If they're not interested enough to ask questions, that's also another good time to let it go. Now, there's nowhere in here where Now, a lot of times people will say, I've never heard any of this before. And I'm not having trouble believing them. Give reasonable answers that encourage thought. Yes, we're preterists. We encourage thinking. I remember as a boy going to churches and visiting and hearing pastors say, well, don't think about it too much. You'll never understand it. Now, that wasn't any of the preterist pastors I talked to that ever said that. Because we encourage thinking. We want a lot of thinking. We want you to study. We want you to drag out your Bibles and read. We want you to get your dictionaries and start looking up the words and seeing what they mean, where it's going with them. I've been working on trying to figure out Greek tenses, but I have not got that down yet. Okay. Something about Greek tenses I lose it out there somewhere, so I just have to get out my interlineary and go to town on it. But I love the Word, and I love reading it. And one thing I've discovered is a lot of times when you run into someone who has that V8 moment. You all remember the commercials? I could have had a V8, Jesus came back at 80, 70. When they have that V8 moment, all of a sudden they come to you and say, wow, all those scriptures make sense. I always thought they didn't make any sense. They make wonderful sense. Yes, they do. And I think a lot of times when we plant our seeds with people, it is over time, if they're the type of person who thinks and reads much, they're going to start seeing that, if they're honest. Okay. Next slide. Once again, it's about planting the seed. Information is a wonderful thing. And we live in an age where you cannot hide information. Okay? Anybody can get on a computer right now and Google preterist and get a wonderful definition of what a preterist is, get more paper than they could probably ever read on the subject, and it's right there. We got Bibles that you can put on your computer, that you can put on your cell phone, I can do more research on my cell phone right here, right now, than I used to could in a week with books. And I can do it just like that. You just can't hide information anymore. So once people have it in their mind that this is a possibility, it is so easy nowadays for them to get into it and to study and to learn and to grasp that information. I've told several people when I was born, as I said, the church was already Preterist. And about 1995 or so, I got online on AOL. Y'all remember AOL? Digital dial-up. Yeah. And Brother Grimes said, I want you to go look up 8070 and see if there's any background information. See, we didn't know anybody else was out there. And I went and I was searching it up, and I came to something called a Preterist archive. What in the world is that? And I got to looking through there, and I printed out a couple of pages, and I took it over to Brother Grimes, the pastor at that time. And he looked at it for a little while and read it through it, and he said, I want you to go over to my office. And he told me exactly where to look to get a book about this thick. Pulled it out, brought it back over. He's leafing through there, Preterist. And he said, I've had this book since 1937 and never knew that the word for us was in here. The thing is it also opened up a wonderful, vast world of information. You got the Preterist archive. You got the writings of so many notable people out there that have done wonderful research. If you have not taken the time to listen to David Curtis's 7 Feasts of Israel, you have got to do that. I mean, it is amazing. Some of the works that Don Preston have done are absolutely amazing. I just love it. I read it, and then I read it again, and I read it again, and I'm more excited the third time I read it, right? There's so much wonderful stuff out there that I've gone to conferences all over the country, met all sorts of wonderful people. And I think that the truth is getting out. It is really spreading. The wonderful thing about it is none of us can take credit for it. Jesus Christ is the reason it's spreading. And the truth is a wonderful thing because it doesn't matter who you are, the truth sounds like the truth. And I feel I'm so blessed to be here, to be the president of the GMA, to have been a pastor for 15 years, an assistant pastor for 10 years. I'm so blessed that sometimes I sit around and I'm just amazed. If I was going to say one thing that has really struck me within the last few years, it's that the will of God is taking place. And you and I, as people that have a deep love for Jesus Christ in our heart, we're in it. I know we have a tendency to think of ourselves as not doing everything we could do, not being everywhere we could be. But I think each one of us that love Jesus Christ, He's making sure we're where we need to be doing what we need to be doing. We're here today, right here, Blue Point. Beautiful place, by the way. When you're from Texas, you appreciate green. A lot. I guess I need to wrap it up here, but when I get to talking about how wonderful it is to live in the love of Jesus Christ, how wonderful it is to live in the kingdom of God, to know that my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren have a future, that they all can be wonderfully blessed by Jesus Christ. I'm just so excited about it, I tend to ramble on. Well, I guess it's about time for me to step down. If anybody has any questions about anything I said, including criticisms, feel free to come up and talk to me anytime I'm here. I'm a pretty approachable guy. Well, I do have my son running block, but I just really love and appreciate these meetings. I appreciate the Bible studies we have back home with some of the other preterists in the area. Community is important. Like the brother said, we shouldn't avoid gathering together. But then on the other hand, we also have to be open to talking to people that might not see things just the way we see them. But once again, I encourage you to have a light touch, have a loving touch, and in all that, we are blessed. Thank you.